Hello and welcome to Expulsion at 50. As we have heard in previous episodes, there was a group of Ugandan Asians who became stateless during the 90-day period. Their fate lay under the auspices of the United Nations and different international NGOs such as the Red Cross, Caritas, Save the Children Fund, and various refugee councils. Rodney Lobo was classified as a person with an undetermined nationality, and he arrived in Bergen, Norway, exactly 50 years ago today, on the 1st of December 1972. Meanwhile, his sisters, Mariette and Lynette, and their parents ended up in India. My name is Dola Vasani. In episode 48, Mariette and Rodney share their respective stories.
What the world needs now is love, sweet love. It's the only thing that there's just too little of. But what the world needs now is love, sweet love. No, not just for some, but for everyone.
Okay, let's start by hearing about your early years and your life in Uganda.
My dad went to Uganda to work in his uncle's shop. After some years, he went back to India to get married. And it was an arranged marriage, as my mother told me. She followed my father back to Uganda.
It was school that was the big thing. And then I used to come home and maybe help in the shop a little bit and get a chocolate or something for helping out. That's why I still like chocolates. I came up to secondary school, and that's when I went to a boarding school. So I was in a boarding school for 6 years.
And where was the boarding school?
It was at a place called Namliango, which is close to a town called Mukono on the way to Jinja.
So was that a boys' school?
That was a boys' school. It was run by the Mill Hill Fathers. So it was a Catholic boarding school. And after that, I started at Makerere.
What were you studying at the university?
I started off with maths and statistics, but it became too difficult for me. So I jumped over to, I started on undergraduate in commerce, BA in commerce, but that I couldn't complete.
It's a slightly different trajectory because you were, I understand, 9 when you left. So what are your sort of childhood memories?
For me, it was a school and my friends and the neighborhood and the close, my close family and my family's friends and the Ugandan Goan club that was there. I remember it as a carefree, happy, safe childhood where the atmosphere was always good. And I noticed, of course, there were differences between the Africans and the Indians and the English, but that was just how it was. I never reflected on it as a child.
Yeah, no, I don't think none of us did. Okay, so Makerere, you were a student, and I wonder what that was like, the university.
I enjoyed the studies. I was also involved with the sports in at university and was in the sports committee for the university. So I was very active there, and that of course took a lot of my time.
You're doing commerce, like in a lecture, in a class. Like, what was the demographics?
The majority were Ugandan Africans, and after that it was the Asians, but there were no Europeans. There were lecturers, yes, or tutors. but not students.
And Mariette, you were at primary school, huh?
It was a Catholic school run by nuns, as far as I remember, and most of the students were mixture of Africans and quite many Goans, actually, maybe because it was a Catholic school. Yeah. But no whites at all that I remember. Yeah. As far as I remember, we used to play across ethnicity, Africans and Goans together. But when I was home, I usually played mostly with Goan friends. So it was more mixed in school than at home, though I had some neighbors I would play with who were African. But mostly we mixed with the Goans. I think also socially, as it comes to my parents, they're mostly mixed with other Goans, I think, Rodney?
We were not politically conscious of what was going on. I mean, why should we at that age? So we lived a carefree life, yes. We were just brought up to think that this is how the world is. It's ours, and you have the Africans there, you have the Europeans over there, and everyone lives that life.
Okay, so then August 1972 happened, and Rodney, you're at Makerere, Mariette, and your other sister and your parents were still in Entebbe, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so let's just establish the paperwork. So who had what passport?
I had a Ugandan passport, and so did my father. He had Ugandan citizenship, but not a passport.
My sister and I won my dad's passport. I think that was common at that time, that we followed the father's citizenship. And our mother had an Indian passport.
Your mother had Indian passport. All right, so what happened then? How come you guys got split?
What happened was that I was at Makerere, and I had about 4 or 5 months left before the final exams in March. So I decided that I wanted to stay on, complete the exams, and then join the rest of the family.
Lord, we don't need another mountain. There are mountains and the hillsides enough to climb. There are oceans and rivers enough to cross, enough to last till the end of time.
His citizenship was torn up in front of him when he went to get it verified.
Okay, so here's a situation where your father's got the Ugandan citizenship, but when he goes there to have it verified, it's basically torn up, so it's revoked. So he becomes stateless, does he?
He and my sister and I.
Yeah.
All three.
So the three of you become stateless, i.e. you don't have any papers, and your mother retains her Indian citizenship, her Indian passport. And Rodney, you continue with your Ugandan passport and you stay on in Makerere.
I stay on.
I just wonder if they consider other options.
You know, in this chaotic time, I don't really remember what their thoughts were, but in time it became a question of just getting out of the country, getting out safely, and then later maybe trying to find ways out to other countries. I think this is some of the thoughts that went through their minds. Let's get to India, where we know the place, it's safe. We have a house, they had a house in India, and they have, of course, had relatives, so that was a safe haven to start with, and then you could try looking for other opportunities. I think that was a way of how their thoughts went at that time.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And also I can imagine, if they're in their late 50s, they're thinking, go to a country which is so cold like Canada.
Yeah, they knew India. So
Yeah. So when you say they knew India and that you had a house there, does that mean you were going there quite regularly, or they were going there quite regularly?
It was too far and too expensive. So I remember just going there once before I was 9. I don't know, Rodney, you might have gone.
I remember going there maybe 3 times or something.
So if the announcement was made in August, when did you go to India?
We went in October, but I don't remember the date. He got a kind of a travel document for himself and my sister and me. And he used his savings, I suppose, to buy a plane ticket. So we went by plane from Entebbe.
And how would you say those 2.5 years were like?
For me, it's been extremely worthful in my life because I know India in another way than I would have if we didn't have that stop there. But for my parents, it must have been very painful. They really didn't know what was in the future for them and especially for my sister and me. And we lost the whole year of school because we couldn't get admitted without papers. And we were always dependent on living with relatives. Their savings were, I suppose, almost coming to a zero. So when we were allowed to come to Norway, it was fantastic. It was jubilation at home. But I enjoyed India. I have to say, as a kid, I accommodated to both India and Norway very quickly, and I learned languages very quickly, and I got friends. So for me, especially the time in Goa was amazing. It was a bit like Uganda. There were no cars. We could run around freely. There were mango trees. So all in all, what shall I say? I thought it was really awful that we were thrown out of Uganda. But for me, those 2.5 years in India were precious. I think my parents managed to keep us safe and not show us how worried they were. We were allowed to be kids, even though we know they were worried. We knew they were worried, but not how bad the situation was. That I understand when I grew up.
Okay, so Rodney, there you are. You still got 4 or 5 months to finish your degree. Did that happen?
I didn't complete the degree because the situation as I saw it was getting worse. It was getting dangerous, not just worse, it was getting dangerous. There were gun-toting people around the place, moving between Kampala and Entebbe wasn't easy. There were roadblocks, you could hear shooting at night and daytime, and it wasn't safe at all. And what really got the trigger going for me to leave was when a car that I was sitting in got hijacked and stolen at gunpoint. And then 3 of us who were in the car, all of us decided that we're not staying here anymore. We're going to try and get out as quickly as possible. So then we dropped everything that was called studies, and started orientating ourselves on getting out, ticket, passport, money, whatever. To be able to leave Uganda, I wouldn't have been able to leave using a Ugandan passport. So what I did was I had to say that I lost my papers and I have nothing, and went to the Red Cross, who then issued me with a travel document and told me where to go, what to do.
Okay, so you go to the Red Cross. I think they set up an office in
They set up an office, yeah.
And you say this is the situation, and they just give you a travel document. So
Right.
From Entebbe, where did you go?
From Entebbe, we were told, at least I was told, to go to Italy to buy a ticket to Rome. So I bought a ticket to Rome, and at the airport in Rome, they sent me to a camp for Ugandan refugees.
And how long did you stay there?
I stayed there for a few weeks, and during that time, the Norwegian Refugee Council, it was called that time, they came down and they offered to accept around 100 persons. So I was among those 100 that said, yes, I'll go to Rome. And then we were then moved out to a small hotel where we were briefed on what we were coming to, etc., etc. And then we left for Norway.
You end up in Norway around this time, actually, huh? November.
1st of December.
1st of December. Ooh.
1972.
You're on the plane, you go to Rome, and I can't imagine you had a lot of warm clothes, did you?
No, we didn't. We didn't have warm clothes at all. And when you're talking about warm clothing, we were offered, I think, some used clothes by some people. And then of all things, you know who came and gave us some warm clothing? You won't believe it, but the Pope. Now I remember the Pope supplied us with some warm, at least they said it was the Pope, but it was his office that supplied us with some warm clothing. And we were granted an audience with the Pope. The Christians or the Catholics, no, and we refused to be only Christians and Catholics. And we took along some Sikhs. We have to take a fair amount of people who have come. This audience with the Pope. But you know, an audience with the Pope means about 1,000 people sitting there. And then the Pope comes in and he says, hello.
So there you are on your own. You land in Norway on the 1st of December, 1972. Why Bergen, and how was Norway for you?
As I was studying commerce at Makerere, they said I should go to Bergen because Bergen has the school for, similar to the LSE in London, they have it in Norway, it's in Bergen. I found people were very friendly, very curious as to what has happened. We received a lot of sympathy because of the word Amin. I mean, he drummed up a lot of sympathy for us. People were kindly because of the situation. Also because Norway wasn't a country that had so many refugees at that time. And we were only a handful. We were 100 divided between two cities. Inquisitiveness, who were we? Why weren't we black like other Ugandans? What's the difference? Why? We were invited to people's places for dinner. They celebrated Christmas with some of us. So there was a welcoming, I think that's the word, there was a welcoming attitude towards us. We had sympathy on our side.
So when you say that there were few refugees, I wonder if it's about Norway not having accepted refugees of color before the Ugandan.
Yeah, it's refugees of color. Because there were many refugees from Hungary that came in. Then we came in of color, and then the Vietnamese came, the Chileans came after us, and then it started broadening up.
So when you went to university, was your course in English or in Norwegian?
No, the course was in Norwegian. Everything was in Norwegian. All the lectures were in Norwegian. But then I had to go for a course before that. And as I said, they were very forthcoming in the sense that I could write my answers in English. Because people at that level are very fluent in English. Many of the textbooks were in English. So English was no problem for the lecturers or professors.
So there you are on your own in your early 20s.
Yeah, 23, 24. Yeah.
So what, you were living in kind of student accommodation?
Yes, I was given a student room. Yes.
And what were you thinking about what was happening to the rest of the family?
Yeah, this was something that that took up a lot of my time. What to do with them, or what we were going to do with each other, because they were in India, and in one way they were at home, being in India. But then at the same time, I had to think. At least I thought about my sisters and thought, what would their possibilities be in India for the long term? Talked to a lot of my friends, and talked to the Refugee Council, and we came to the conclusion that the best thing was for them to come to Norway, and so that we could reunite there and they could start their own lives.
And you didn't want to go to India?
No, I had started studying here, and my parents discouraged me from going to India because they said there's really no possibilities for India. So that became a non-discussion item. I was going to stay in Norway, with them in India, or with them in Norway.
So what would you say were your main challenges at that time, aside from, of course, missing your family?
The language was a challenge. There's a cultural challenge. There's new ways of doing things. Norway is a very orderly country. You have rules and regulations. You have norms that you have to learn and follow. Things are different, yes. Especially when you think of Africa, India, when you look at things, simple things like the traffic, it's two different worlds.
2.5 years you're apart from your family before Mariette, your sister, and your parents joined. So Mariette, did you guys then join Rodney in Bergen, or did you go to Oslo?
No, we came straight to Bergen, where he and the leader of the refugee council met us at the airport. So that was our welcome to Norway.
And what month was that?
That was the 1st of May, so it was beginning of spring. And I think my parents were hoping that we would make it in spring.
Yeah, you timed it well. So that year, what year was that, May?
75.
And so how was it for you, and how do you think it was for your folks?
We were very welcome. People were curious. I think many had never met a person with brown color before, so they were touching my sister and I. They would touch her hair, and the kids were really like excited. They entered our house the first day we moved in, and they weren't leaving. So my parents had to almost push them out, and we couldn't understand each other, but they were extremely friendly. I remember Norway as a very, very welcoming, friendly atmosphere. The first years, that was extremely important for me to land in a new country in that way. I went actually to a Catholic school. My parents were recommended to send me to the Catholic school. And there was a very high mixture of people with different backgrounds, pupils from, some were refugees and some were kids of diplomats and etc. Yeah. So that felt also like a safe haven to be in that school. Yeah. And I learned the language very, very quickly. I think they say that if you learn a foreign language before you're 13, it's easier. So I think maybe I reached just in time.
And how do you think it was for your parents?
I think it was very, very tough, really. And always not an easy place to come to when you're in that age. The language is hard. It's not easy to learn a language at that age. The weather is it's very tough. Even in the summer, you never know if it's going to be warm the next day, if the sun is coming up the next day. And the winters are very hard. They were met by people in a very friendly way, but they couldn't communicate so well because people didn't know much English. And I think for them, the Catholic Church was a very important place to go to, and they were welcomed, and they had a place to go to where they felt safe. And I mean, safe in a social way, if you understand. Norway is, of course, a safe place to come to, but you need that kind of social safety. And then we have a few Goan families who came actually with Rodney as refugees from Uganda, and we stuck together for many, many years, and we still have contact with them. And we celebrated Christmases and New Year's Eve, and we even would do some Goan dances at the church festival sometime. And so all those things meant a lot to them. But I can't imagine how it, I think it was really hard for them, but for them, it was a question of, like Rodney said, of a question of building a future for my sister and me. So I'm immensely grateful, yeah, for that.
And did they work?
My father actually worked until he passed away till he was 67, and he could retire, but he worked a little more. My mother tried working, but she had problems with her health.
Yeah. And how was it food-wise for them?
It wasn't easy, isn't it, Rodney? There was nothing in the shops that they
You get salt and pepper.
Yeah.
You got salt and pepper in the shops. That was as far as.
You could hardly get rice. There were tiny packets of rice. The vegetables were like carrots and cabbage and potatoes. So my mother she would try and make the best out of it.
So I wonder for you, you're 50 years on, what has changed? Whether they're migrants or they're asylum seekers or they're refugees are viewed and treated?
I think it's mainly the politics that has changed, because people, when they see refugees coming, they still stand up for them. In 2015, when a lot of Syrians came and the authorities were actually not prepared, people opened their homes and they gave them. They would meet them on the streets with blankets and soup, and we see the same now with the Ukrainian refugees. There's so many that are opening up their homes and trying to help in all kinds of ways. In 2015, actually, a third of the population had helped the refugees in some way or the other, and that's quite a high number. My opinion is that there still is this friendliness and solidarity, actually, towards refugees, but that the politics are much more harsh. And of course, you also have racism, because I won't say that the whole of Norway is positive to refugees, but I still see that solidarity there.
What the world needs now is love, sweet love. No, not just for some, but for everyone.
I understand you've both been back to Uganda.
I've been just once. I wanted to show my family what I came from, and I was actually a bit scared of going back, because I thought all the tragedy would come back to me. But it was a fantastic experience to go back and see.
And when did you do that?
In 2012.
Yeah, so that's like 10 years ago you went, huh? And it was 40 years later. Okay. And then how was that experience for you?
For me, it was like reassuring, I think, is that the right word, that the life I had been talking about actually occurred. I could show my children the school I went to, the classroom I'd been in, the house. And for me also, it was a kind of, since I was so young when I left, it was a kind of reassurance that I had this good life in this place that really exists. Yeah, and sad too, in a way, sad too.
Yeah. And how was it for your children, would you say?
They were very, very happy that we made the trip. So they feel they have roots in Uganda as well, and that's important for them. They're very proud that they have roots in Uganda and India. They're very proud of it.
And Rodney, when did you first go back?
Oh, I first went back in around 86, 87. That was the first time I went there with my wife at that time and two children. Yeah. But we didn't feel safe. There were still these roadblocks, and there were people with machine guns around the place and stuff like that. Instead of staying for about a week, I think we stayed for about 5-6 days. But then I've been there again with friends. I've been there with my present wife. I was there recently now in July of this year. So I've been there at least about 6, 7, 8 times.
Well, that's quite something, because I guess I'm kind of similar. I've been back a few times, and I wonder, like, how is it for you? Why do you keep going back?
I love the place. I feel at home. My old school is there. I meet friends from my school days, rugby days. We were at a boarding school together. I have these neighbors that I call my own family. They say I can live with them. She has a house that's big enough. She has children around, and grandchildren call me grandfather.
For both of you, it's lovely to hear, that you had these wonderful memories of that time. So how has it kind of shaped you, or shaped your life, living in Norway? How would you say?
It's probably made me more broad-minded living in Norway, accepting other ways of doing things. Maybe in some ways made me a little more orderly. I keep to time, generally. I can look at Norwegians from the outside, and I can look at Norwegians from the inside, and that gives me an additional element to living. Yeah.
We used to live with diversity, both in Uganda and also those 2.5 years I had in India. That's really been important for me to see that, to know that you can live with people with different religions and different cultures and even different languages where you don't understand each other, but you can live in peace and friendship. And like in Uganda, we used to go to the Gurdwara, but they offered you a free meal, and we used to celebrate Hindu festivals with Hindu friends in Bombay, and yeah. So I think that's been very important for me, especially in these times where racism is.
Anything else you would like to say?
There's one thing that I don't see very much, at least I haven't seen anything mentioned about the expulsion of the Asians from Uganda, and that is an apology. The way things were done, I mean, you have to do things in a decent way, treat people decently. And I feel that the expulsion that was done, I didn't experience it personally, but too many people left with a trauma. They had to come from distant places through army checkpoints that were harsh, to Entebbe to leave by plane, or to Kampala to leave by train. And I see that very many countries like Australia, Canada, they are coming to terms with their own people, with their minorities. And I feel that in a way, this is about time that the Ugandan government also comes up and says, look, number one, we shouldn't have done this for the citizens of Uganda. And number two, the way it was done, I feel I don't see that this is a part of the Ugandan Asian story.
I was wondering what your thoughts are about.
I haven't thought of it before, but I know that, like in Norway, there has been an official apology to the Sami and also to some of the national minorities, and that is by governments who weren't in power, but who still have stretched out an apology. So it is possible to be done, and I agree that it should include also the Ugandans who lost their lives and who chased around when during Amin. Yeah.
What the world needs now is love, sweet love. What the world needs now is love, oh sweet love. What the world needs now is love, oh sweet love.
The Norwegian government can't tomorrow turn around and say, get out, even to people who are not supposed to be there. Because there's also something to do with just being decent to your own fellow human being.
Thank you for listening. Till next time, keep well and keep safe.
What the world?